So we're on week 14 of this live cooking series, and this is actually our last summer inspired recipe. So of course it was just Labor Day, which kind of is the sad end to our summer. Even though you can still get a lot of summer produce right now, tomatoes are still in season. You'll still find a lot of good summer things in the stores for the next, couple weeks. But we're winding down with our summer-inspired dishes for this live cooking series. So we'll still carry on with doing the live cooking series going into the fall. There's still a ton of delicious ingredients that we'll be using. So I will keep you posted with that as I, start to develop the recipes for the fall. So I figured as a way to kind of wrap up our summer recipes for this season, we would do something sweet because we usually wrap things up with dessert and something sweet. So we haven't really done any baking recipes. I'm not much of a baker. I'm much more of a savory cook, so that's part of that. And also with baking, usually we have to keep things in the oven for a long time, which doesn't really work well with the live cooking series. So we are doing our first baking recipe today, and we're using plums as our seasonal ingredient. You can use any stone fruit in this recipe, so all stone fruits are in season in the summer, so that's anything from plums to apricots, peaches, nectarines, all of that good stuff. So it's really anything that has that kind of like oval shaped pit in the middle of it. So I'm using plums for this one, but you could, like I said, you could sub in different stone fruits, whatever kinds you like. You could also do a combination, so you could do some plums and some peaches, whatever kinds of fruit you like in here. This recipe would also work well with different fruit in general, so you could probably sub in really any kind of berries that you wanted. You could do this with chopped up apples, so to make it for the fall when apples are in season in the fall. All we want here for our plums in this recipe is we just want to chop them up. So I'm going to show you how I do one, but we just want just small pieces. You could also, and I'll just show you how I chop one. You could also slice them if you wanted to. So with these stone fruits, like I said, they have that oval pit in the middle, so we just want to cut around that pit. So we get these nice pieces, and you can also, the pit is pretty small in the plums, so you can also use that little bottom piece, and then this is where our pit is, so we'll discard that. And so you could do this in, if you wanted to, in thin slices, like this. That works, but it's just nice and easy to chop them up into small pieces, just like this. You get it apart. And we just want about 2 cups of the chopped plums. So it's about 4 plums. And so the fruit is going to be the filling for our plum crisps. And then we're going to make a nice crumb topping out of a few dry ingredients. Chop this guy up. Okay. All right. So that's how we chop up the plums, nice and easy. And then all that's really has to get done with this recipe is that we're just assembling everything. So along with our plums, we're going to add 2 tablespoons of maple syrup. You could also use honey here instead of maple syrup. And you could also use, like agave, or you could even use brown sugar if you wanted to. But I like to use a more natural sugar like maple syrup. Plus the flavor of the maple is delicious. And then we're gonna want a 1/4 teaspoon each of dried ginger and cinnamon. So it's just ground ginger a 1/4 teaspoon, and a 1/4 teaspoon of the ginger will really come through. You'll really be able to taste the ginger in that. Of course, if you don't like ginger, you can totally omit it. And a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon. And whoopsie. And we're gonna add a tablespoon of flour. So the flour in this is going to help create, it's gonna help to make the plums kind of get like thickened a little bit, to almost be sort of like what you would see in a pie filling, right? Where they get kind of like jammy almost. So that's what the flour is gonna do. You could also use cornstarch here instead of flour, but the flour works well, and you can use any kind of flour that you like. I'm just using all-purpose flour here, but any kind of flour really will do the trick. So any all-purpose or just a regular whole wheat flour is fine. And then we're going to add in a 1/2 teaspoon of orange zest. So I'm using a microplane here. You could use a grater to do this. We just want 1/2 teaspoon of the orange zest. So with the zest, we just want to, like always, we want to get just the, just the very outside. Once it gets to that kind of white pith on the inside, you want to keep rotating the orange so that you don't get that, the white part, because that will be bitter. And adding zest like this, you could do lemon zest also would be good. Adding the zest just kind of brightens up the fruit filling. So it's a really nice touch with any fruit filling that you're doing for a pie or some sort of, crumble crisp like we're doing here. It's always a nice addition. If you're doing something like blueberries go really well with lemon zest. You can kind of play around with different combinations of flavors. But we've been using zest a lot too in these summer recipes because it just adds that really bright kind of summery flavor. So it's a nice addition here. Okay. So that's all we need for our plum filling. So all of that's just in this bowl here, and we'll stir that up. Also, I forgot to mention when we started, if you're cooking along, you want to have your oven preheated to 375 degrees. So the oven temperature will always be a little bit lower when we're baking. When we're cooking a lot, we tend to be somewhere in like the 400, 425 range. With baking, we'll be more in like the 350, 375 range. All right, so you'll even notice when you stir it up from having the flour in there, you'll see that, the liquid from the maple syrup is already kind of thickening. So that's what we want, so that when this cooks, it turns into a little bit more of like a jammy kind of pie filling. Okay, and then for our dry ingredients, we're mixing into a separate bowl. So we're doing like a crumb crisp topping. So usually you'll have some sort of oats in there. So we're using rolled oats. I haven't done it with with instant oats. I'm not sure how well it should work, but you'll get a little bit of a different consistency. But if that's all you have, it should work. So we want a 1/2 cup of rolled oats or old-fashioned oats. A 1/4 cup of flour. Again, I'm just using all-purpose flour, but you can use a whole wheat flour here. The flour is really just to kind of bring the crumb topping, to kind of help hold it together. So it doesn't, it doesn't really matter too much what kind of flour it is. Add that in there. Then we're using a 1/4 cup of, you want finely chopped pecan. So we have these pecan chips that are already really finely chopped up. You can see, or you can't see, I don't know how to show you. You could also use, so I'm using pecans here, but you could also use a different kind of nut. You can use finely chopped almonds, pistachios, really any kind of nut will work. And it's really just to add a nutty flavor and crunch to our crumb topping. And then we need a 1/4 cup of brown sugar. So always with brown sugar, with baking, you want to pack the cup. Right, so you want to get it nice and packed in there. And a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon. So we have cinnamon in the filling and in the topping. Right, so we have all of that nice mixed in here. So we're going to mix all of this together. All right, so obviously when it's still just all dry ingredients like this, it's very loose. So our final ingredient for the crumb topping is going to be cold butter. So you want the butter to be cold, so I still have it in the fridge. I'm gonna grab it. We just want 3 tablespoons of butter. So we're gonna cut the butter into chunks, and then it's called cutting in. So we're gonna cut the butter into the dry crumb topping here. Until it turns into more, it's a little bit more cohesive and kind of has like that crumbly texture, but it's holding together kind of in like little crumbles. So I'm just gonna grab the butter. So we just want 3 tablespoons, that's all you need. I'm just gonna cut it into chunks here. So we just have the butter, I just cut it up into cubes. So we're gonna add all of that right into our dry crumb topping. And then if you have a pastry cutter, you can use that. If you don't have a pastry cutter, you can use 2 forks, which is what I'm going to use. So we're gonna take 2 forks. And you just want to literally cut the butter. So using your forks, you want to just kind of chop the butter up a little bit, but at the same time, you're mixing it with the crumb topping. So you just want to do this enough to the point that the crumb topping is, sticking to the butter, and we're getting kind of these, this more like crumbly texture that's not so loose. We want it to hold together a bit more. And having the butter in there is going to help when we put this in the oven. It'll help to make the crumb topping nice and browned and crispy. So just run your fork through it a couple of times until you get the texture that you're happy with. And like I said, I'm not much of a baker, so you can count on me for, pretty simple baking recipes. You can see this one really comes together pretty easily. We're just, have our filling in one bowl and our topping in the other bowl. We don't really have to do much, much else here. It comes together nice and easy. And this is a great recipe to have because, like I said, you can really switch up, the fruit that you use. So you can always make it different. Okay, so you can see we're starting to get these more, these more like chunks. It's a little bit more cohesive. Okay, this is pretty good. It does not need to be perfect. We want to get this thing in the oven so we can eat it. Okay. All right. Just enough you can see that we have these nice kind of nice crumbly texture. And I see a lot, you know, you'll see a lot of different kinds of crumb and crisp kind of recipes, and most of them, you know, the topping will have butter in it. But I find that sometimes, like, they'll call for way more butter than you really need. It's an easy way to lighten up the dessert a little bit. So I'm only using, like I said, 3 tablespoons of butter here. And I find that's really all you need. The topping comes out nice and crispy. You don't need a full stick of butter here. Okay. All right, so that's it. So our 2 components of this plum crisp are done. So all we need to do now is assemble. So the nice thing about these crisps, and I did it this way partly because it saves on some cooking time, because the recipe is written so that you make 2 individual size 8-ounce ramekins. So it's perfect, like I said, for an individual serving or for 2 people to share. And it cuts the cooking time down, you know, compared to if you're making a big tray of a plum crisp that might take like an hour in the oven. This is only going to take like 25 to 30 minutes in the oven. So it cuts down the cooking time quite a bit. So this recipe is intended to make 2 8-ounce size ramekins, or you can do it all in one, which is actually what I'm going to do here. And I have 1 16-ounce ramekin, so I'm going to put it all into this 1 16-ounce ramekin. Also, something like this size would work. This is also about 16 ounces, just a different shape. Of course, you could always double the recipe and do it in a bigger tray if that's what you have. And you would just have to, you know, as whenever you're making the size of the, you know, the vessel that you're using to cook it in, if that gets bigger, then the cooking time is going to go up. So if you do double the recipe and do it in a bigger baking dish, the cooking time would probably also double. So just something to consider if you do use a different size dish. So we want to just put and you don't need to spray this at all, because the plums give off so much liquid, it's not like it won't stick in there. And you can serve it. The nice thing about doing it in something like a ramekin is you can just serve it right in this, and it's a really cute presentation. So we're just putting all of our plums in. Okay, so we put all of our plums in. Move this out of the way. So it really does fill nicely to the top. Oh, I can't really see. There we go. And then we are just putting our crumb topping right on top. I'm going to get my spoon back. That's easier. And just spoon it right over the top. So if you're doing it in 2 smaller ramekins, you would just divide it in half between each one. You might have a little extra topping. You know, and this is nice because we don't have to, you know, take out like the stand mixer or anything like that. So it's a nice, easy, nice, simple baking recipe. Okay. So this is what we have now. So it's nice and almost overflowing. So we're not skimping on anything here. And same thing with if you do 2 in the 8-ounce one, you'll also, you know, it'll be nice into the top. So that's what you want. It's not gonna like expand, so you don't have to worry about it, you know, overflowing out of the ramekin. It doesn't expand at all. So you can really just kind of load the topping on there. Okay, so this is going into the oven at 375 degrees for this, because I'm doing it in the bigger one, I'm gonna put it in for 30 minutes. Uncovered. And that's it for that. So we're gonna let that guy cook. It's like Food Network here. We do have a cooked one. It's in a container, but I can show you kind of what it ends up kind of looking like. So you can see how, you know, the plums really kind of cook down, and so they become really thick. The flour helps to really thicken them up a little bit. When it comes out of the oven, you do want to let it sit for like 15 to 20 minutes. It'll be super hot, and letting it sit will help it finish cooking a bit too. So you let it sit a little bit, so it's delicious, nice and hot. It's delicious also at room temperature. I tried it both ways. So if you have leftovers, it'll be good the next day as well. And if you're feeling crazy, serve it with some ice cream or some whipped cream. Delicious.